Should we do it?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. I'm gonna let you start with number 10, and then I'll do mine.
Okay.
Um,
Maybe before we get started, I've done some of these lists before, and
okay.
you really kind of put yourselves out there for kind of some intense blowback and criticism from those
Yeah.
that will disagree with the rankings, right? So
Right.
I thought I would start off with maybe some disclaimers, if that's okay.
Definitely.
For anybody listening, just to be clear, this is a personal favorites list. That's all it is. This is not the objective top 10, if there is such a thing anyway. This is not the best-selling list of hair metal albums or the most influential or critical to the genre. This is simply my favorites. So now some of these may be those other things, but they don't have to be. So just wanted to offer that as a full disclosure. Others' opinions rightfully differ and their mileage may vary. I think it was the esteemed David Lee Roth said it best. Music is like girlfriends. There's no accounting for people's tastes, and mine included, right? So that's my disclaimer. The other thing was, I'm sure, like you were saying, this is an impossible task picking up a top 10. There's probably, when I was thinking about it, there's probably 25 to 30 albums that all have a legitimate claim to the top 10, maybe even more. So
Yeah.
it breaks my heart to leave some of these out. But that's the beauty of the genre, right? There's so much great music. So for anyone listening, again, if I don't have your favorite album in the top 10, don't worry. I probably love that album too. So
Yeah, there's only 10 spots in the top 10. You can't put 50 bands in there. So,
right.
yeah, but I'm
And
the
the
same.
last thing is,
Go ahead.
when picking the list, I know we're calling this top 10 hair metal albums. I'm using that term generously. If you read the book, and others, if you've read the book, I hate the term. I can make
Yeah.
a solid argument as to why 80 to 90% of hair metal bands should never be labeled as such if you're using the term as a negative connotation. But of course, it depends on your definition. So there's going to be people who hear this list and they say, okay, how can Skid Row be on this list? They're not a hair metal band, or Guns N' Roses, they're not a hair metal band. Listen, I agree with them all day, every day, but they're still going on the list. So apologies in advance.
Right.
So I think I've got that off my chest. So I'm ready to roll if you are.
Yeah.
Hey, before we get started, how many albums do you think we're going to overlap? How many are on the same on both of our lists?
I'm gonna go with I'll go with 5.
Okay, I was thinking maybe 4, maybe 5. But
Okay.
I'll bet you I have a list of 20, a top 25 list. Actually, there's all kinds of lists on my website. But I'll bet you almost all yours are at least going to be on the top 25.
Yeah.
We'll see. All
Yeah.
right, you want me to start it off? Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not? Let's go, man. And for everyone that doesn't know that's watching, Chris has a book, and it's actually right behind him. It's called The Spectacular Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of Hair Metal. And we actually did an interview, what was it, about 2-3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And that full interview is on this channel as well if you want to check that out. So, but yeah,
Okay.
tonight we're just going to do some fun stuff. We're going to do top 10 hair metal countdown, and we're going to let Chris start off.
Okay. Number 10. Def Leppard,
Oh,
Hysteria.
okay.
So, and then immediately I start with a controversial choice, right? Because again, people are going to say Def Leppard are not a hair metal band. Yep. Again, I know it. Yep, they're right. I agree with them. But again, we're casting a wide net here. But I think it was amazing that this album even made it to the shelves. What an amazing accomplishment against the backdrop of all the challenges they had. They went through a couple of producers. Rick Allen lost his arm, for goodness sakes.
Right.
But they persevered and it paid off. They tried to make a record some Def Leppard purists are going to say, oh, it's got to be High and Dry, it's got to be Pyromania, and this is when they steered away from everything that made them great. And it was, a change for them. They tried to really combine their hard rock sound with really commercial pop melodies and use a really cutting edge production technique. They wanted to make the rock version of Michael Jackson's Thriller. I remember reading where every song was a little different and they all had the potential to be hit singles. And it did. It yielded unheard of 7 hit singles, right? It had all the big ones that everybody knows: Pour Some Sugar on Me and Armageddon It, Rocket Women, Hysteria Animal. And the irony was that a couple of the best songs weren't even released as singles, depending on who you ask. Gods of War and Love and Affection. So, there wasn't really any skippable songs. And that's something I think you're going to see on everything on my list. The album has to be solid front to back. Maybe you can excuse a couple things, but just a couple of great songs is not going to make the list if the album has some filler on it. So, 25 million albums sold. It's hard to go wrong with that, even though some critics and fans, understandably mourn the death of the Def Leppard, whose sound was based on the new wave of British heavy metal. But there's no doubt this introduced them to a much wider audience, and it was just a huge success.
Yeah, what they sell like over 30 million copies of what album was that? So like went over 30 million copies.
Yeah, worldwide,
That was
absolutely.
the one, yeah. So are you doing albums or bands? Because I was just doing bands.
Really? I was doing albums? Did I let it down there? Were we supposed to do bands?
That's how I thought of it. I guess we didn't communicate that part correctly.
God, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding.
No
Yeah,
problem.
I guess I'm going to do albums.
You can do well. Why don't you do albums and I'll do bands?
Okay, all right, that sounds good. We'll give them a little diversity.
Yeah, that works.
All
Um,
right.
yeah, Def Leppard, man. When Photograph came out, that song, I remember there was one kid in my grade school that had a Def Leppard shirt on, and I know he wasn't even a fan. And I was so jealous. I wanted that shirt so much, and I was so mad at that kid. I was like, you never even heard High and Dry, you know? And he looked at me
Yeah, a
like,
lot of people came in at Hysteria or Pyromania, right? They had to go back and get the first two.
yeah. So number 10, for me, doing bands, I've got Hanoi Rocks.
Ah, wonderful.
Um, they kind of started it all for kind of Guns N' Roses, and a lot of bands were really influenced by them.
Yeah,
So
Axl Rose admittedly kind of ripped off almost all of Michael Monroe's stage presence and stage moves, right? He'll admit to it.
yeah, yeah. So that's a great band. They have to be in there. So that's my number 10, Hanoi Rocks.
Yeah, wonderful. Big fan. Big fan. I also really enjoy a lot of Michael Monroe's solo work. He's still putting out a ton of great albums, as I'm sure you know, and he
Yeah,
hasn't lost much vocally. Fantastic songs. Always look forward to one of his releases.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
All right. Number 9 on the albums.
Sure, let's do it. Aha,
Look what the cat dragged in, right? So,
great one.
a lot of people, I mean, I'll start by admitting that in many ways, this is a very, wet behind the ears, juvenile kind of record, but it just doesn't stop it from being one of my favorites. Lately, and maybe it's a reflection of the past year and, times that have been tough for a lot of people, I've really been leaning towards albums that are just plain fun, without trying to be overly analytical of them from a technical standpoint. Writing about bands and writing about this music, especially with writing the book, I tend to get a little too critical and adopt too much of you get caught up in, is the singer hitting all the right notes perfectly? Are the lyrics profound? Is the musical composition intricate? Are the drum fills complicated enough? But sometimes I think it's just how it makes us feel. And I tend to forget that. Well, Look What the Cat Dragged In makes me feel happy.
Yeah,
It's got some really great tracks, right? Cry Tough is a classic. I Won't Forget You is a terrific power ballad early on. Tark Darter to Me is a classic. Even some of the ones that didn't age as well, like I Want Action or Let Me Go to the Show, maybe they didn't age as well as others. I mean, they're still a pretty good time. So every time I break it out, it never disappoints.
definitely. I love that album, and it brings me back to high school, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember my brother had the tape, and I used to steal it and put it in my little Walkman, right? And I'd listen to it on the bus on the way to school. You know, it's just you get those kind of memories from that. I mean, how can that not? How could you not want to hear that stuff again? You know?
Well, it is. It's so much about memories. They say, whatever fan of music you were when you were a teenager is the fan of music you'll be for your whole life. And in a lot of ways, that's true, right? Because
Yeah.
it's about, the memories and the associated feelings. And yeah, I remember being on the bus with the Walkman.
Let's do number 9 for me as now I'm doing bands. Now TNT I put in there. Now they're not like a hugely known band, I don't think, but the singer, Tony Harnell,
Yeah.
whew, one of the best voices in rock. I mean, the range, the power, unbelievable. And then you had Ronnie Letecro, who I interviewed on the show, an amazing guitarist, amazing. And then now these guys were from Norway,
Yep.
and they had to come to America. And I tried to ask Ronnie about, like, culturally, he explained like the cultural differences, but bands, right? I know bands. um, you all think you're the best, right? You're friends with other bands, but you know, you got egos, right? So I think the reason TNT never blew up is I wouldn't want those guys opening for my band because they're going to blow you out of the room, talent wise, right? So, and I think Queensrÿche actually had some of those same problems getting on opening acts for bigger bands because the bands were like, well, I mean, these guys are just too good. I don't want to follow that,
Yeah, it was a
So
real thing, right? I mean, it sounds petty, but it was a real thing, back in the
yeah,
late 80s and early 90s. And bands would get kicked off the tour for upstaging the main act, right? Or even for selling more merchandise at the
yeah,
time. These stories. But yeah, TNT is fantastic. I own all their albums, of course, and I always wonder why they didn't break big in the U.S. And part of it was probably because they just couldn't get that perfect single on MTV, which was part of the
right.
problem. Uh, but yeah, I mean, Tony Harnell, he still to this day, I'm sure hits all the notes.
Oh yeah,
And even their later releases in the past 10 years or so, fantastic.
yeah. That My
So
Religion
people
album
should
they
check
put
them
out.
out if they haven't.
Yeah, definitely check them out. You will love them. And if you're a guitarist, you got to hear Ronnie.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Hey, I'm excited. I'm excited for these selections. Um, number 8 on my albums list,
Ah,
debut from
beautiful.
Skid Row. Right, it's a classic for sure. There were a couple things that I remembered when I first heard this album. I mean, it was really something, but I distinctly recall thinking, "Hey, this was a lot harder and heavier than the stuff some of their peers were doing at the time. Some of their contemporaries like Poison and Bon Jovi. It
Yeah,
was more aggressive than that. But the thing that it had going with it is, on top of that aggressiveness, there were still tons of hooks and melodies. I think it was one of the best albums at that time of combining those two things. And of course, the other thing that stood out was, Sebastian Bach really set the songs apart from the rest of the crowd. In his prime, he was almost untouchable as a vocalist, perfect for these songs. I think without him, even though Snake and Bolin were great songwriters, I think without Sebastian Bach, and they'll hate me for saying this, so apologies, they might not have broken through, right? It might have been just your average hard rock band. Probably not, but just some really great tracks, right? Some classic tracks for the era. Of course, it had the 2 big power ballads, just high octane, heavy riff oriented songs with plenty of hooks and catchy sing along choruses. And I like the fact that they had 2 guitars, right? The dual guitar attack really gave it some depth.
you just did Skid Row. We are not. What are we on? Number 8. I'm on number
8 for
8.
you, yeah.
8 for me. I've got Poison as my number 8 hair metal band of all time.
Wonderful. I'd have to have them on my list too.
Yeah, we've got a couple so far on the list. So, yeah, Poison. We've already talked about them. Uh, lots of big hits. They were the catalyst for a lot of the bands that were termed under the hair metal thing, uh, and I know they didn't start it all, but they were definitely one of the bands that one of the major bands that broke it through, right? So
Oh, absolutely. It's hard to think hair metal and not think of Poison. And it may be one of the rare hair metal bands where almost nobody really has an exception with calling them hair metal. Maybe even the band members themselves don't have an exception to it.
right.
And that's hard to find. Bobby Dahl, the bassist for Poison, had this famous quote that I love. He said, I didn't want to grow up and be a musician. I wanted to grow up and be a rock star. And that's
Right.
exactly what I became, right? And I think that perfectly summed up, not that they weren't talented musicians, because I think they were, to some extent for sure.
Oh yeah.
But it was just really, really fun, good times music.
Yeah. Well, you say glam metal or hair metal. The first band I always think of just by default is Poison. That's the first band that pops in my head.
Yeah, they gave themselves the title, what do they call themselves? The Glam Slam Kings of Noise, right? You maybe remember
Yeah.
they had a tour of that name in the 2000s, I think.
Wow.
Okay, yeah, they would have definitely been on my list.
What do you got at number 7 over there?
Number 7,
Ah, very nice.
yes, Whitesnake, self-titled. What can you say about this album, right? Simply, when you think about the really classic pop. Well, first of all, this is another controversial choice, right? Because a lot of them, people that are going to call themselves true Whitesnake fans, those are around since the late 70s and the early 80s. This album, according to them, is their downfall, right? This is when they went from a classic rock, blues, hard rock band into this descent into hair metal. And so it really depends on your taste, maybe. But if you're a hair metal fan, for a somewhat bluesy hard rock hair metal album, I don't know that you can do much better than this, right? Coverdale on his day was an amazing vocalist, and the songwriting team of Coverdale and Sykes really proved to be a winner. Unfortunately, this would be the only time you would hear them really writing together, but just some amazing songs, like the Led Zeppelin-ish Still of the Night. Of course, fans of Led Zeppelin are going to think that's sacrilegious to say. Give Me All Your Love, songs like Children of the Night or Straight from the Heart. This was just pop metal, hair metal perfection at the time. And of course, the two huge ballads, Here I Go Again is probably up there with the most recognizable songs from the era. And they had the big epic songs, Crying in the Rain and the ballad Don't Turn Away. It's fantastic. I think, if fans don't know, and most of them do, this album existed in two distinctly different formats. The initial UK release had 11 songs, two of which they wound up omitting from the US version just because the physical limitation, the space on vinyl at that point, you were limited, and they wanted to remaster it for the US as a much bigger, heavier, more dramatic, more powerful sound. It took up more space. So the songs they took off had nothing to do with their quality. The songs were the You Gotta Break My Heart Again and the big ballad Looking for Love. This album that I'm holding is the 30th anniversary, which has all the songs on it. Those songs are great. They belong on the album. So if you can, get the expanded edition and make sure you don't miss those two.
I remember those music videos with that gorgeous woman. Was that
Yes.
was that David Coverdale's wife? I think.
Well, they didn't. They started out, as strangers, but Tony Katane, right? They did wind up dating. They were actually married for 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
she
I
was.
mean, everybody knew her from the videos, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think she helped a little bit with the success of some of those songs.
No doubt. No doubt.
All right. Is it my turn?
Yes.
All right. Number 7 band, I have Warrant.
Oh, wonderful.
I mean, think of all the hits those guys had, and then Cherry Pie just totally blew up. And I know he always regretted writing that song. But yeah, I mean, what a great tune. I don't care. I love it.
Well, no one will hold it against you here.
And the video was just great, with the big, huge smile and the gorgeous woman dancing around. And it was the funny, fun video. And Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Dirty Filthy. Well, help me out here.
Dirty Rotten Filthy Stinking Rich.
Yeah, that album was great. I love that album to death.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. They would have been on my list too. I'm a really big Janie Lane fan. And I think it's tragic that he's not with us. But I never thought he got his due from people that weren't fans of the genre, just for being a tremendous songwriter.
Oh yeah,
he was an amazing, amazing songwriter, and a lot of the stuff he did after the Cherry Pies, just some terrific material out there. And I thought he was a tremendously charismatic frontman too. And I loved his voice. A lot of people said, well, he's a karaoke singer. I never thought that. I thought he was an amazing performer. He could have sung the phone book and I would have happily listened.
Karaoke singer.
Yeah, well, someone told me that once, right? I mean, what do they know? But he was I thought he was amazing. And
he had a great voice.
Yeah,
great
I mean,
voice.
Really distinctive too, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like Skid Row with Sebastian Bach. I mean, I think without Janie Lane, I mean, Warrant, would have never risen to the level of success they did. And of course, he wrote all the songs, but even with the songs, I think his voice gave him a real distinct flavor.
Oh yeah.
Loved him to death. Love all their stuff.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said about Skid Row. By the way, without Sebastian Bach, I mean, you need that front man, that voice, and Sebastian Bach had it all, man. Great, powerful, rangy voice. Big dude, long hair, good looking dude.
People say what you want about him, but he was perfect for that band at that time, right?
Perfect. So let's see. Let's do your number 6. See, you got the hard. He's got the hard job. He had to do. He thought, just in case you didn't catch it in the beginning. Poor Chris over here has been, racking his brain trying to figure out the top 10 records from hair bands, or I just did
Personal favorites.
bands. Personal favorite. Personal
Full
favorite.
disclaimer.
Yeah, same here. Same here. I
Well,
mean,
the next show, I'll do bands and you can do the albums.
oh God. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard, right? But some of these are going to get predictable at this point. So number 6,
Aha.
right? How can you go wrong with Slippery When Wet? I mean, this was, one of the albums that really ushered in the genre, right? There was, the door was kind of open a crack anyway, because you had bands like Ratt, Motley Crue, Quiet Riot, Dokken, Van Halen, but Slippery When Wet really took the crack in the door and just blew the door down, at least commercially, right? That launched the genre into this stratosphere of dominant commercial presence. It had these two huge, big pop metal anthems that are as enduring as perhaps anything from the period. Living on a Prayer and You Give Love a Bad Name. I mean, Living on a Prayer might be, depending on your viewpoint, the single most popular song, most long enduring song from the entire era, maybe up there with Here I Go Again. And then they had a huge power ballad, Wanted Dead or Alive. Maybe that's one of the big 4 power ballads of the era, along with, let's see, Home Sweet Home, and I guess Every Rose Has Its Thorn, and maybe Here I Go Again, I guess.
Sweet
But the
Child
record
of Mine.
company, they only released 3 singles from this record, right? They were ready to move on to the next album, but there were tons of other songs that could have been singles. I Die For You, Raise Your Hands, Never Say Goodbye, Wild in the Streets, they all could have been hits.
Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, one of my favorite songs from this record didn't make the record. A song called Edge of a Broken Heart wound it up on the soundtrack for what was the movie? Disorderlies in the late 80s, 1987, I think. And eventually made it onto the Bon Jovi box set. But if you've heard the song, I think it's really one of their best from that era. John Bon Jovi didn't think it was good enough to make the record. Which, interestingly enough, for those that don't know, he didn't think Living on a Prayer was good enough to make the record. It took Richie Sambora convincing him that song was good enough to make the album. So I don't know what he was thinking at the time, but it's a great album front to back.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Well, big surprise. My number 6 band is Skid Row.
Okay. So hey, our list would not have looked too different.
No. Well, let's go to number 5.
Okay, well, I'm right with you, because look what we've got at number 5.
Slave to the Grind. Okay.
Slave to the Grind, right? This is another maybe controversial choice, because this album, it's still Skid Row, but it is hard to really think of this album as a hair metal album at all. In fact, it's impossible to think of this as a hair metal album. These were not catchy pop metal good time tunes with lyrics about girls and partying, along with maybe a love song ballad or two. This was a bone crushing, hard rock, heavy, almost heavy metal album. It still had some hooks, certainly not as many as the debut, but it certainly wasn't as melodic. It was just unrelenting, storming riffs and some really powerful, incredible vocals and screams from Sebastian Bach, right? I mean, this was his apex, perhaps, in terms of a vocal performance. Not that he wasn't good after that, he was, even on Subhuman Race, which I didn't care for that much. His performance was still amazing, but different than their peers at the time. This was the early 90s, 1991. They took their sound in a completely non-commercial direction, got much heavier. And I don't think it was a calculated move. Calculated would have been something more commercial. It was just who they were at the time and what was in their heads. But it wasn't just Pantera riffs, right? There was still some pretty good songwriting here.
Yeah.
And of course, they paid the price for this. It didn't sell, even it was the first heavy metal album to debut at number 1, so they had that. But it didn't sell like the debut, because it didn't have the big commercial ballads like I Remember You and 18 in Life. It did have the 3 balladish songs, but those were dark, intense songs. They weren't standard fair love songs. And the rockers, just, oh my goodness, Monkey Business and The Threat and Living on a Chain Gang and the title track, just amazing. You get done with this album and you just feel like you've been run over by a truck, in a good way.
Yeah.
Just crushing. Amazing. I love it.
Yeah, Monkey Business was great.
Yeah, I remember staying up when we were kids. Remember you could catch these videos. You could only catch them some of them on Headbangers Ball, which was, what was it, 2 a.m. on early Sunday mornings. I remember keeping my friends up way too late to catch that video. I remember just nodding off until it finally came on. Like, yes,
Why in the fuck doesn't MTV play videos anymore?
Oh, well, that's probably a different podcast. It's a long discussion.
I mean,
but shame on them, right?
I mean, everyone our age bitches about it, and we all want it. Why don't they fucking do it? Because bands still make them, you know?
I don't know.
Anyway.
It's probably a generational thing. I can't speak to it.
Yeah, yeah, sorry then. That's just that's just a random thought by me. So my number 5 top hair metal band is Bon Jovi.
Ah, we're in lockstep almost here.
This is crazy. I wonder if we would have done albums, where we would have lined up the albums. I did kind of when I picked my bands, I did consider albums,
Of
you
course.
know, and hits and popularity and my own personal taste. And, there are a lot of different factors that kind of came in. So even though you're doing albums, I think we're pretty much still kind of on the same path here. Um, so you
Yeah,
did,
you couldn't leave Bon Jovi off the list.
oh,
Certainly not with their output in the 80s and what they meant to the genre at that time, regardless of where they are now and the type of music that they do now, which has nothing to do with hair metal, and that's fine. More power to them, I guess. Uh, and maybe it's a good segue. Let's just jump right into my number 4 here. Can you see it?
oh yeah, bad
So
medicine.
yeah, I mean, some people would argue that I should have switched spots with Slippery When Wet, but for me, I thought New Jersey was just a bigger, more complete effort. Even if it didn't have any single songs that might outrank, the big three on Slippery When Wet, I think top to bottom, it was a more solid album. No real weak spots, and maybe some welcome diversity a little bit as well. As far as the singles, I mean, this album had 5 songs hit the top 10. No hard rock album had ever done that up until that point. No hard rock album has done it since. I mean, that's an amazing landmark.
Wow.
I love the opener, that opening atmospheric build up to Lay Your Hands on Me, which they, designed specifically to open their live shows at the time. And I think aside from the singles, I mentioned it's a complete record. 2 of my 3 favorite songs in this album weren't even released as singles. Right? I love the epic storytelling of Blood on Blood, and Homebound Train is really Bon Jovi rocking as hard as they could at the time. Um, People talk about the death of the album today, and there's only singles and streaming, and there's no deep tracks. But I
Yeah.
think those deep tracks and that album experience, that's what gave the album the texture, right, and the context. And you think about songs like from this album, like "Stick to Your Guns" or "Wild as the Wind" or that interlude "Ride Cowboy Ride." They tie the whole thing together, and I think people are missing out if they don't get that full front to back album experience. But really, along with that Whitesnake album, as far as like true pop metal albums, it's hard to beat this as far as the peak of the genre. And Bon Jovi were, absolutely at the peak of their commercial power at that time too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Because the point I was going to make was, singles are a certain kind of song, right?
Right.
They are meant to grab your attention. They're meant to catch you with a hook or something, you know, and they're usually, they have the same kind of attitude. It's either happy, happy, or it's the ballad, right?
Right.
And, but yeah, all those songs in between those on the record, that's usually the best stuff.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and you get burnt out on the singles too, right?
yeah, you can only listen to it so many times.
Yeah.
What do you got
All right.
it?
Who's next on your list? We're in lockstep here still.
That was your number 4, right?
Yes.
All right. Number 4, uh, I've got Kiss.
Okay. Classic.
I had to put him in there. I don't know if they're technically considered hair metal because, I mean, well, look, they've got long hair and they put on makeup, so
Must be hair metal, right?
right. Gotta be hair metal. I remember spinning those records as a kid and just, staring at, just holding the record in my hand and just reading it, cover to cover, just looking at their pictures. And then when they put out like those 4 solo albums, or you know, my 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 favorite one is the Ace Frehley, even though it wasn't probably as good as the other ones. I always loved Ace. I wanted to be Ace when I was a kid. So
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, you can make the argument that they're not in the same, 80s hair metal genre, but, how do you leave a band that potentially started it all and was the blueprint for it all, or at least one of the blueprints for it all, off the list, right? I mean, you
yeah,
talk to any of these bands we've talked about so far, or any of these albums I've referenced, and you ask them, you know, their influences and their heroes, and they're all going to say Kiss in the list, right? If they name 4 or 5, Kiss is going to be there.
Yeah.
Especially, you know, we talk about Sebastian Bach and Skeeter. I mean, I don't know any bigger Kiss fan than Sebastian Bach. So
Right.
yeah, you couldn't leave them off the list.
And I want to mention a few few bands I just don't consider hair metal, and that's why they're not in here.
Okay.
Enough's Enough.
Ah, yes.
They would be in here, but I don't consider them hair metal. Their first record, you could say, okay, that was hair metal, but after that, no.
You know, we've discussed that before. You know, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, and who else was I thinking of? I'll probably remember them later, but like Queensryche is one of my all-time favorite bands. They're not hair metal, but and not in my opinion, anyways. If
Yeah,
they
most
were,
people. Yeah,
if they were,
most
they'd
people.
be on my list. So
Okay, good stuff. Good stuff.
yeah,
All right, we're hitting the top 3 here. Again, it's going to get kind of predictable. So number 3,
okay,
Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood. You know, and again, some listeners out there are going to consider this extremely sacrilegious because they're going to tell me I'm just absolutely wrong on this, and that the answer has to be Shout at the Devil or maybe even Too Fast for Love, right? So
right,
every
right.
time I talk about Dr. Feelgood, I feel like I have to apologize to 90% of Motley Crue fans every time I tell them this is my favorite. And then I wind up, I think I have to apologize them a second time because I tell them my second favorite Motley Crue album might be the '94 record, right? So then I've really lost them. But no, I mean, my second favorite probably is Shout at the Devil. But I think a lot of, like we were discussing before about memories, you know, your view of your favorites is a lot to do with when you musically came of age, so to speak, right? If you were 16 years old in 1984, the best Motley Crue album was Shout at the Devil, the best Ratt album was Out of the Cellar. If you were 16 years old in 1989, like I was, the best Motley Crue album might have been Dr. Feelgood. The best Ratt album might have been Detonator. I'm gonna really get some grief for that if people pick up on that. But you know, it's just really what you were listening to at, you know, memorable times of your life. And as land breaking as Shout was, and it really was, it was amazing. But Dr. Feelgood was like a different kind of great for me. I mean, Shout was this awesomely aggressive and menacing record with that incredible guitar tone from Mick Mars. But Dr. Feelgood was, you know, objectively a more polished production, a more polished set of performances from the band, and it was a more commercial songwriting effort, right? A better songwriting effort in some eyes if you like things that are more commercial based. So this can be good or bad, but you know, it's got some great songs in it. I mean, the title track is killer. It's got, you know, again, it had 5 singles, and it had other sleazy stompers like Slice of Your Pie or She Goes Down. Of course, it had the melodic Don't Go Away Mad. All these showed up on MTV. It was Motley Crue at their peak, at least commercially, and maybe even performance-wise, outside of the '94 record, which I think is their probably best musical performance. But it's mostly a solid record. Funny, the only 2 warts on this record for me are the ballads, Without You and Time for Change, the album closer. And now Without You was a big single. I just never particularly cared for it. On my playlist, I just simply sub in Primal Scream for Without You, and I chop off Time for Change, and I've got my great Dr. Feelgood album. So
right.
that's probably offensive to some, but like I said, as a teenager, Motley Crue were by far and away my favorite band. So I can't get away from this guy.
Yeah. Well, in all fairness, Crue's first album, um, I'm not even sure if that was done in a studio.
Yeah, I mean that's part of the magic of it, but it's pretty
Yeah,
raw, right?
it was. It sounded great, you know, like it has that 80s sound, which you love, you know. But I think I heard they made the music video for what was the first video they put out for that? Loudwire, right?
Livewire, yeah.
Livewire. I said Loudwire. I heard they actually recorded that video in one of the bandmates' apartments.
I hadn't heard that. I should really know that, right? I don't know
And
why I wouldn't know that, but I
it
hadn't heard that.
may or may not be true, but I remember always hearing that because everything was such low budget, you know. And
Yep.
yeah, and so yeah, so when you're looking at a band's greatest albums, you know, it's kind of hard to pick one that, you know, they kind of not threw together, but you know, didn't even have a like proper studio, didn't have time to make it sound the way they wanted to. Shout at the Devil, obviously, studio, bigger budget. And I remember spinning that record, man. That was crazy. my dad my dad came down. He used to come down, turn that down, and and then my mom would come down, and I'd like flash her the satanic symbol on the cover and be like,
The pentagram, the upside down pentagram.
"Mommy, go away," trying to scare her out of the room. What do you got at number 3, man?
Oh, that was it. That was my
Oh,
number
that
3.
was
It's your turn.
oh shit.
And I suspect you might have Motley Crue in your list yet. We'll see.
I'm trying to get out of it. I'm trying to get out of work here. Uh, I'm not. My number 3 is Def Leppard. So,
Okay, wonderful.
I mean, one of the hugest bands ever, right? So they got to be in there.
Yeah, I mean, again, people are going to take offense that we've put them on a hair metal list, and like I said, I'll defend all day that they're not a hair metal band, depending on
Yeah,
how you
they're
define it.
not.
But if we're talking about the era, right, and the general genre of music, yeah, I mean, they're absolutely huge. Absolutely,
Yeah,
turned out to be one of the biggest bands ever in any genre. When
yeah.
you look at just impact of selling records, they had 2 diamond records, really right back to back at the time.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, extremely talented, bunch of musicians too, right? Some of the musicians from the genre don't get their due, but those guys are really talented musicians.
Yeah, and then Rick Allen and that terrible car crash, and
Yeah, I
um,
mean,
and
how is
Steve.
it not the end of a drummer's career when he loses his arm, right? I mean, just an
Yeah,
amazing story.
and then they lost Steve Clark, my favorite guitarist. So that band has been through some stuff.
Oh, certainly much more than your average band, no
Yeah.
doubt.
All right, let's put you back to work here. What do you got
Okay,
at
I got 2 left.
number 2?
Here we go. You can see it.
Ah,
So this is a lot like, Look What the Cat Dragged In. Similar, this is not Mozart's Fifth Symphony or Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, right? I'm not going to claim it is. But if hair metal was largely about partying and fun and good times, for me, this is pretty much as good as it got, right? I mean, this album was much maligned by a lot of critics. I just can't get away from the fact that it's a super fun album, right? If you're looking for the hair metal genre and partying and fun, this is it. I love CC DeVille's guitar tone on the album, even if the overall production is pretty thin. It was the first rock album to be recorded entirely digitally. And the producer, Tom Werman, who I think is an excellent producer, he interviews with him today. He'll say he hates the sound on that album. I usually prefer a much thicker, solid bottom end, but for some reason, I never minded the sound of this album. I thought it was great for what they were doing. Right out of the gate with this blistering opening chords of Love on the Rocks and, big time singles, Nothing But a Good Time. And I mean, it was basically a rallying cry for the entire genre. Fallen Angel, of course, Every Rose Has a Thorn was a huge power ballad. Even the cover of Mama Don't Dance was a good time. And,
yeah.
the whole album. I mean, even Good Love or Back to the Rocking Horse, these could have been singles. I think MTV and the audience at the time would have lapped them up just the same. Just never seems to be a bad time for this record, it seems like. So.
Yeah, my band, I got my band, what was it, about 6 months before the shutdown, we finally started playing Nothing But a Good Time.
Okay.
So, and when you strip that song down, it's really just like a rock, blues, country kind of vibe to it. Because when we do it, we do a lot of country songs, and it fits right in.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's just I mean, I'm not saying it's country, but it's just a song, right? Like we talk about, it's just rock because everyone thinks hair metal glam. There's no talent, and that's
I mean,
some different writing style. It's all the same, right?
actually, it's a strange thing to say, but I often say there's a lot of similarities between country music and hair metal. They
Yeah,
both have, a lot of hooks, a lot of, they both tend to have a big sing-along chorus,
yeah,
right? The fans are both very passionate about it. It's about partying. It's about a good time a lot of times. Then, we have the power ballads in hair metal that they've got, the love songs in the country music. So there's more similarities there than people think, I think sometimes.
yeah. And then you got the sad songs where the cowboy sitting in a bar drinking a shot of whiskey, thinking about his woman.
Right,
It's
right.
not all that different.
Nope.
uh was that your number 2?
That was my number 2. So we're up for your number 2 band.
Wow. Number two, man, I had to go with Guns N' Roses.
Okay, I was wondering where they were going to show up on your list.
Yeah. I mean, Appetite for Destruction was just a perfect album from beginning to end, you know. I remember I was going to mention this to you in our last interview, but I forgot because I think before hair metal and glam metal and all that, those terms came out. I remember guys that were into heavier bands used to say guns and posers.
Ah, yes, I've heard this.
So I think um, before the hair metal, I think the word was poser, right? Anyone that wasn't like a heavy into like heavy, kind of metal, you were called a poser. So I got called a poser like all through high school, but that was our name for it. But yeah, they weren't posers though. I used to argue like Guns N' Roses, no way. Just because
Yeah.
Axel had his hair teased up, that was it. I mean, they were all leather, t-shirts, ripped up jeans, and they weren't posers. They weren't hair metal, but I gotta put them in there because they're considered it by a lot of people,
Right.
and just one of the biggest bands ever. So yeah.
Well, people aren't going to believe it that you and me didn't coordinate this, but I promise people we didn't.
No,
But
we
if you're
didn't.
ready for my number one album, my most favorite album,
There you go.
Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, right? And again, some people are going to say, again, this is another controversial choice because, like you said, this is not really a hair metal album. It comes from the same genre for sure. But the ironic thing is perhaps this album may actually have been something that ushered out, hair metal as we knew it up to that point, right?
Yeah.
This wasn't good times party rock with fashion and flair. This was kind of a turning point for the genre. This was, a highly aggressive, seedy, sordid, violent, drug-addled, look into, the Sunset Strip and the life these guys were living. Like you said, this was the real deal.
Yeah.
It really wasn't that different from the world Motley Crue was living in, but it had a heightened intensity. We just talked about Open Up and Say Ah. I said that's a fun album. This is different, right? This is something raw and fierce. And like you said, I think you said perfect album. It's hard to argue with that. No filler. And, I'm never going to skip a track on this album, not even once. It was a lightning in a bottle moment, I think, with those five distinct personalities. They each brought something to the table, whether it was, people talk about Steven Adler's swing, even though he might not have been the most technical of drummers. Izzy wrote these amazing rhythm guitar parts that perfectly complemented what Slash was doing. Great songwriter. Axel had a really distinctive, scream and wail, just an incredible vocalist. Duff brought this punk vibe to the band, and Slash was really, focused on these Aerosmith 70s type of riffs. Just an amazing record. I don't have many childhood memories for whatever reason, but I'll never forget the first time I heard the opening to Welcome to the Jungle.
Yep.
And then you hear Axel come in, and I just thought, whoa, like now
Yeah.
this is something different, right? This is in my face, and this is real, right? But yeah, commercially, it's one of the highest selling. It is the highest selling debut album ever. Depending on whose numbers you use, it's right around the 15th best selling album in history of any genre. I think the only two hard rock albums that are certified with more sales than this are Led Zeppelin 4, of course, and AC/DC's Back in Black. Excuse me.
Wow.
But hey, not bad for a bunch of Sunset Strip degenerates, right? At the time, a lot of people, they might say it's overrated, but for me, I will never get tired of this guy right here.
No way. And a lot of Slash's guitar work, he said it was improv in the studio.
I have read that a couple times. Yep, amazing, right?
Right. I mean, talk about, pressure's on, like, all right, do your parts. This is what's going to be on the album. You have, 3 days or 3 hours or 3 minutes. I don't know how they did it, but
That album actually took them a pretty long time to make. Like I said, for a bunch of degenerates, when they got in the studio, they were pretty professional in terms of looking for especially Axel, exactly what he wanted, which was a perfectionist performance. Even Slash, he worked a long time. He barely found the right guitar tone on that album. If you read interviews with him at the last minute, he was finally satisfied. But people think, well, this is just a bunch of sleazeballs from the Strip putting together music. No, that was a really focused effort. for that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they never really made another album just like that. You know, it was a one of a kind.
Yeah. Would they come up out with the acoustic album after that, right?
Yeah, they had the placeholder, you know, just to kind of keep the public buying records. They had Lies, which was,
Yeah.
of course, the old
Generalized.
EP reissued with the other side being the half day's work of the 4 acoustic songs,
Yeah.
which, of course, the record company was right. He tried to buy him some time, and, the record still sold 4 or 5 million copies, I think, until they finally got to the Illusion albums.
Yeah. I'll leave my opinion of the Illusion albums out of this conversation.
Yeah, I probably share your exact opinion. Honestly, I mean, I wasn't a huge fan.
It's almost like they turned into a caricature of themselves, you know? Um,
It was a different time at that point, right? For them, it
I
just wasn't the same.
was hoping for more Night Train and all that, but you got to let bands grow and, do what they do. We can't expect them to put out the same album year after year. It's just not fair to the band. So,
Absolutely.
well, after much deliberation, my number one hair metal band of all
It's
time,
gotta be.
it's gotta
It's gotta
be
be. Come on, give it to me.
Motley Crue.
Thank you very much.
I'm
Yep.
one of the first songs I figured out on my own to play on guitar was "Looks That Kill." So I was definitely into that album. It had a big impact on me as a kid, and you know, um, what in high school it was Theater of Pain that came out. Smoking in the boys' room. Um, I was literally caught smoking in the boys' room countless times. So I, the old throw the cigarette in the toilet and flush it real quick doesn't usually work, but I was in detention all the time, so it didn't matter. But yeah, I mean, that band, that song, that all those records they put out, I was into it right away from their first one because my older brother had Too Fast for Love, and you know, just so spoiled as a kid. Had all these
Yeah,
records none of my friends knew about, but I knew about. So
they definitely meant an awful lot to the genre, right? Early on in their career, they were literal trendsetters, right? I mean, there wasn't
yeah,
much like Too Fast for Love when it came out. There really wasn't. There
no,
was bands, to your point, like Hanoi Rocks and Kiss and Alice Cooper, but the guitar tone and the sound on a song like Livewire, people hadn't really heard that yet. And then
no,
Shout at the Devil just took, everything that was on the Sunset Strip and really took it up a notch, that set of songs. And yeah, Theater of Pain, people can say what they will about it, but it's a pretty good hard rock record at its roots. And of course, the 2 singles helped break them commercially, got them on MTV. And yeah, I mean, for, what they did for the genre in the 80s was, I mean, they were by 1989, by 1990, they were at the top of the hill. When Dr. Feelgood came out,
yeah,
Motley Crue were the kings of the hard rock world, pretty much, the hair metal world at the time.
yeah. The ultimate party band. There's no one that partied harder than those guys. So
They certainly seem to take the cake, right?
I mean, Nikki Sixx, right? Dies of an overdose, gets released, goes right back home and shoots up more heroin. I mean,
That's the story.
yeah, crazy. What else was I say about that? Motley Crue, Motley Crue. Can't remember.
What can you say that hasn't already been said about Motley Crue, right?
Yeah. Well,
Well,
this
hey,
was
I think if I had understood properly, and apologies, I probably would have had, I think I had 80, I would have had 80 year bands on my list. At least 7, but probably 8. We would have overlapped. I don't know how many albums we would have overlapped.
yeah.
But we would have been maybe slightly swizzled order, but we would have been about the same. So
Yeah. And once again, everyone, this is just a personal taste thing, just for fun, just something to talk music about. So
I mean, you're going to get the hate comments, right? I put a list of top 25 albums on my website, and I said it was favorites, but
right.
you wouldn't believe the feedback. I think the nicest comment I got was, "This list is crap." I think that was the nicest comment we had. So, what are you going to do, right? I mean, it's good that people feel passionate about the music. I mean, particularly, out of the cellar, Ratt's album wasn't on my list, and it's going to be on most people's list, and it's an essential album for the genre for sure. But for me, I always thought Out of the Cellar was half killer, half filler almost. And again, I know I'm offending some people, but 4 or 5 songs on that album are amongst the best of the genre. But the other half was always kind of subpar for me. But hey, I know it's a popular record. So again, to your point, apologies to anyone we've offended. If you have a favorite band or album that wasn't on this list, I promise you, we probably love them too.
Yes, we do. Well, yeah, Ratt. I don't think I put Ratt on my list. No, I
Yeah,
didn't.
you're gonna get some feedback on that.
Yeah,
I predict.
I love Ratt. I mean,
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Warren DeMartini is one of my favorite guitarists. Wanted. That's what was it? Wanted.
Wanted Man, yeah.
Wanted Man. Oh, that video was awesome. Great band. I learned Round and Round. I learned all those songs on guitar when I was a kid. So.
Yep, Ratt in 1984, Ratt was hair metal. They were it.
Yeah.
The look, the sound, everything. And of course, they got themselves on MTV with that Round and Round song, and that was it from there.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's good. I appreciate. I always like hearing other people's favorites from the genre, and I really like it when they come up with something that isn't on my list, because I go back and I listen to it, and oftentimes there's something there that I missed or didn't pick up on. So it's like finding treasure.
Yeah.
I always appreciate hearing other people's views. So anyone that's listening, let Scott know your favorites. We'd love to hear it.
And if you disagree with anyone, make sure it's Chris.
Right, I can take it. Trust me. I wrote a book, right, and people have some feedback on that too, so I can take it.
Well, no one comments on my channel, anyways. They're shy, so
I think that's not true.
I think we'll be okay. Well, this was fun, man.
Yeah. Hey, like I said, sorry I messed it up for you and didn't follow the directions.
No, I'm sure it was my fault. Trust me, it had to be my fault. I have so many things going on right now, so maybe we could do it again. Next time you can have the easy job, and then I'll do the top 10 CDs.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. All right, brother. Thanks a lot for hanging out, man.
All right, my pleasure, Scott. Always great to be on the show and great to hear from you. Can't wait till the next time we talk. Thank you.
Definitely.
All right.